And you are live.
Good evening, everyone. I am India Oakes, Chair of the Annapolis Education Commission, and I'm calling our August 2021 meeting to order. Let's do roll call so we can confirm we have a quorum. Ward 1, Brianna Griffin.
Present.
Ward 2, Jeff McCris.
Present.
Ward 3, Enid Collison Lee. Ward 4, Kayla Golder. Ward 5 is myself, India Oakes, and Ward 6 is vacant, so on to Ward 7, Laura Booth.
Present.
Ward 8, Jessica Packler.
Present.
At-large member, Ken Starks. At-large member, Odessa Ellis. At-large member, Janet Norman.
She's there but muted.
At-large member, Grace Matthews.
Present.
An older person, Sheila Finlayson.
Janet is here. I just learned how to unmute on my phone. Thanks.
Great. We have a quorum, so just to start out tonight, Dr. Tobin will not be joining us tonight, since she is attending the public tribute to Board of Education member, Candy Santwine. The other thing of note is, if no one objects, we will add safety protocols for the 2021-2022 school year to the agenda, under new business, and we'll talk about the current Aacps protocols, along with air purifiers in schools. Does anyone have anything else to add to the agenda?
I motion to approve the agenda with those additions.
I just had an announcement about something I saw in the paper about skilled trades at AAC.
Okay, we can add that. Is there any objection to the agenda, just to save time? How many people were able to see the minutes from the June meeting?
I realized I don't know that I sent them out, but they're in the folder, which everyone should have access to, but I'm happy to send them out now if we want to hold and vote on them at the next meeting.
I wasn't able to find them in the folder until today, and I haven't had a chance to read them. I was looking for them, but they weren't appearing, or I didn't have access or something. So I have not been able to read them.
Sorry about
Okay,
that.
since not enough people saw the minutes, let's table approving them until next month.
I need to make a motion for that.
Oh,
And there was no online public testimony that I am aware of, so we will jump right to welcoming our special guest, Yulita Slattery, and open the floor to her to share the remarkable work of STARE, which stands for Start the Adventure in Reading.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here tonight and giving me the opportunity to bring you an update about STARE. As many of you know, our mission is to increase the reading levels of second graders, increase the students' self-confidence, and provide a caring environment where reading is fun. This past year was a challenging one for everyone, but we were able to pivot and deliver a successful STARE at Home program. We had the largest enrollment in our 16-year history with 120 students. We delivered 960 packages with 3,200 books delivered to students so that they could build their at-home libraries. We created and provided flexible participation programming with virtual book clubs, which were visited more than 500 times by volunteers and students. And our website portal called Stare at Home was visited by more than 1,000 people over the last year. We revamped and implemented a new bilingual communication system, which allowed us to communicate with the families much more efficiently than in the past. Our volunteers really stepped up and got involved with the kids by joining book clubs and offering virtual smiles during a difficult, scary time. The upcoming year will be a recovery one for all of us, but we are looking to increase our enrollment throughout our 12 sites throughout the county. To do that, we are working to increase our volunteer base to support the increased enrollment at all of our sites. But we have particular urgent need for a volunteer site coordinator at our Robinwood Community Center. Without this leadership position, we will not be able to offer this program at Robinwood. So we urge you, if you know of anyone, or maybe a family member, a friend, a neighbor, a colleague, anyone you think might be interested in volunteering at Robinwood or any of our other sites actually, please let me know or visit our website at stareannapolis.org. We offer very flexible volunteering schedules and experience is not necessary. We offer super great organized training for all of our potential tutors and volunteers. Our program is generally held 2 times per week for about an hour each. You are valued members of our community, and we invite you to join us as we prepare for an exciting program for the upcoming school year. With your support, we will be able to help students improve their literacy skills and build their self-confidence. Thank you again for your time. May I answer any questions this evening?
Can you say how many schools you work in and how many students total that you're working with in our cluster schools?
Yes, so we work with 12 sites. 3 of those sites are community centers: Eastport Community Center, Robinwood Community Center, and Stanton Community Center. The rest of them are elementary schools throughout the county. In North County, throughout the Annapolis area, and in South County. And we have a total, last year we had a total of 120 students for the STARE at Home program while we were doing our virtual. Well, STARE was not offered at the schools and at the sites physically.
Could you say a little bit more about what you're expecting it to look like this year? Will there be the program in school, or?
That is our utmost hope, is that we can come back in person. We're still awaiting the details of any directives from the Aacps as to safety protocols as it relates to COVID, but we are hopeful that we will be able to come back. We've had to postponement, and we may need to rearrange some of our dates, but we are hopeful that we are going to be coming back. Our students needed, our rising third graders from last year did not get the benefit of our program. And so that's where our hopeful increased enrollment is coming from, or we're hopeful anyway, that that's where we'll be able to help do that. But we can only do that. We're dependent on the number of volunteers that we have. So we've been working furiously through the summer to get volunteers signed up and tutors to help us at the sites.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, can you just give me a brief description of what happens on a regular basis or a daily basis with the program? It's an after-school program, right?
Yes, it is, and I'd be happy to. So it is an after-school program. At the elementary schools, the students basically go from their classes directly into usually the media center within the elementary schools, where we have a site coordinator that leads the tutors on site. Students come on board, we sign them in, we assign them a tutor. This is at the beginning of the year. That tutor will then stay with that student throughout the school year, and they create great, meaningful relationships through that year and help in their training and their tutoring with their reading skills. On site, we have a site coordinator that will take care of signing students in and signing them out. So that is a volunteer position that I just mentioned, which is the position that we need at Robinwood. But every school, every site has a site coordinator and a co-coordinator. So they work in teams to help the tutors and the students. The site coordinators and co-coordinators are responsible for signing in the students and signing them out after the hour and 15 minutes or so training or tutoring that happens during the sessions. And they are twice per week, and the hours depend on the site. Robinwood, for example, goes from 4 to 5:15, and other schools go from roughly 3 to 4, depending on which site. We offer excellent training. We have Melina Ruland, who's our volunteer coordinator, who does all the training, and she's excellent. She's been doing it for a few years, and she takes you step by step through, as a tutor, what you can expect. And we give you tips and tricks on how to work with the students and how to encourage them and make them comfortable and build their self-confidence in their reading.
So is it a drop-in type thing that just come in? I mean, on the same students every Tuesday and Thursday, or?
Yes, and it depends. It's either Tuesday, Wednesdays, or Thursdays, twice per week within those 3 days. The students come directly from the elementary school. The reading specialists at the schools actually give us the list of the students they believe need the most help or could use our help. And that's who the students then come into our area, whether it's a media center or library, whatever area we have at each site. Does that answer your question, Lily?
Yes. So do they use computers in those centers?
No, actually, we use printed material, books. We have all of the materials are given to our tutors and site coordinators. They're given to them by STAIR, and we have a process for every session. The tutors will normally sit down with the students and create an agenda of 7 or so items to check off at the end of each item as it gets completed. Students usually run in 7-minute segments because that's their time span at that age, second graders. Then they move on to either a game or reading, and then they do reading comprehension, and they talk to the students about reading. They let the students read, and then the tutors ask them questions about what they've read. We also do sight words, which are words that by second grade they should, or we hope would know them. And if not, that's the one area that we might work with that student. So we get deep into, in the first few sessions, we try to establish the level of reading that they are at, so we can get them up to the next level and get them up to second grade reading level by the end of the school year.
So you say that the reading specialist, she sort of point out the ones that really need help?
Yes,
Okay,
so the
that's
readings, yes. And so I work or will be working closely with a reading specialist who give us the list of students at the beginning of the semester of the year. And then those students then get assigned tutors. So yes, the reading specialist, there's a reading specialist or a literacy teacher or assistant at each elementary school, and we look to them to help us identify those students in need.
Okay.
Mhm.
So you're using basically the county standards. So the reading specialist helps you to measure. Does she help with testing or measurement to see how effective the program is, or is the program adapted and so that if they progress, it's already been proven that they have been successful or that they're meeting a better requirement in reading?
Yes, so our program is a proven program. We test them at the beginning of the year, in the middle of the year, and then at the end of the year. Throughout the sessions, if a student can get through, say, level 3 fairly quickly, we move them on to the next session, session 4, so that they don't get bored, and we get them moving on quickly, not quickly, but appropriately through the different levels of their learning and their comprehension levels.
Okay.
So at
But the
Robinwood,
school does the testing, we don't.
Okay, that's what I want to, yeah.
Yeah.
the students attend which elementary school at Robinwood?
They come from Hillsmere Elementary,
That's the only elementary school, Hillsmere?
that feeds Robinwood. We have 12
Okay.
other sites. There's a total of 9 elementary schools that we service, and well, they're all elementary school students, but sometimes we service them at elementary schools, and sometimes we bring them onto the community centers, those 3 community centers that I mentioned, Robinwood, Stanton, and Eastport. But they all come from the local elementary schools.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. So if you know of anyone, we'd love to have you. We'd love to help these students. So please join our awesome team of volunteers so we can expand our program. Yes.
I just had a question. First of all, I just want to say what a fabulous program it is. I know when my daughter was at Georgetown East, the group there was terrific. I mean, they were really awesome, and the kids were so excited, and the volunteers went above and beyond to really feed into that excitement and really encourage the kids, and it was great. I worked in the media center a lot, so it was wonderful to see them coming through.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, that's wonderful feedback. I have to admit, I've only been with STAIR since April, and that feedback is what I've been getting since then, and I'm excited to be here for that very reason, for what you just said. So.
Yeah, the volunteers there, they really cared, and they really, they just nurtured the kids, and it's a terrific program, and I'm glad. My question was just, how can we support you? Is there we have folks that are watching online, so is there some place that you take donations, or how does your funding work? And is there a way that aside from volunteering, are there other ways that folks in the Annapolis area can support you?
Yes, thank you, Laura. Great point. We have, everybody can go to our site, our website, stairannapolis.org. There's several links along the top. One of them is volunteer, and that will give you all the information about where to volunteer, the list of all of our sites, and the times at those sites. And there's also opportunity for donations. We love that. Our donations come from across the board, from grants, corporate and private donations. Yes, our website is the best place for all the information that we can offer. You can also find me there if you have any specific questions, but I'm also happy to give you my email now. It's program_manager@stairannapolis.org. And I also want to mention our program does go into the summer. So for example, this year we delivered packages throughout the summer as well, so the students could do some further summer reading beyond their school time.
Any other questions for you, Lita?
Well, India, thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity and getting us on board here on this very important meeting today.
Thank you again. And
Thank
feel
you.
free to stay for the rest of the meeting if you want to.
Happy to do so. Thank you again, and I'll stay on if anybody has any more questions. Thank you again.
Okay, we will move to committee reports, and just to save time, I will just open the floor for any updates. So speak up if your committee has something to share.
I just say on
The news, I was looking through AACC's booklet that they send out, and one of our committees, we're talking about being able to have kids go into skilled trades. And I see where they're going to build a building at AACC for, it says Clausen Center for Innovation and Skilled Trade breaks ground. Are you all familiar with this? And I think it's wonderful. And what I wanted to know was, as a committee, one of the things we talked about was having kids, especially from this area, who weren't going to college or whatever, that I was wondering, how do we go about getting, I mean, it's not even built yet, but you got to get started early. First of all, the counselors need to know about this, the counselors, especially at Annapolis High School. And how do we go about partnering with AACC to get our students? You know, some of them have finished most of their credits when they're in the 12th grade. Is there a way we can, how do we go about establishing a partnership so these kids could maybe go in there and get some basic skill development through the school?
Well, the Annapolis High counselors are already very well connected in with Anne Arundel Community College, and especially our signature change engineering program team. I encourage every one of the commission members to join the Annapolis High School PTSA Facebook page, where our Annapolis High staff post a huge number of career-oriented opportunities and trainings and job fairs and everything else. So please go on that Facebook page, join as a member, and then disseminate it out from there, because that has been a big wealth of information posted by our counseling team and our teachers of the signature program.
Oh.
Thank you.
Any other committee update?
I was just going to say that for the Transportation Committee, I'm reviewing the report that was submitted to the Board of Ed last week to see how that affects our students. And I'm also reviewing the bus times. Laura and I have been reviewing them in India as well, the bus times that were just released, as they have affect our cluster. And if anybody has any questions or thoughts, either those on the commission here or anybody watching, I've already noticed a couple things where an entire neighborhood in Ward 6 does not have a bus stop for middle and high school, for Annapolis Middle and Annapolis High School. And so, just trying to figure out, if there's anything missing, and try to put together a list of things we need to address for our cluster. So that's where the Transportation Committee is right now. I also did want to let everyone know that at Annapolis Middle School, this is in regard to the bilingual situation, Annapolis Middle School has hired a new secretary for the main office who is bilingual and speaks Spanish, which has been asked for longer than I've been at Annapolis Middle and is a great thing. So really excited about that.
For start times, just a quick update. An update is that there's no update. The school board did receive feedback from Prismatic, basically that they are working on new bus routes, but they tabled the decision to they weren't quite done with the routes, so they'll get another update in October. So they have temporarily, or they haven't made a decision yet about whether or not we're going to move ahead with semester 2 as they voted to do last year. So we're still in a holding pattern with that.
Okay, if there is no other update, moving to new business. Jessica and I recently met with AACPS staff and other stakeholders about the summer meal program in the Annapolis cluster, and I will turn the floor to Jess with the update from that meeting.
Sorry, I'm trying to pull up my notes and unmute simultaneously, which didn't work very well. So just one second. So we met this summer. So this has been an issue. This was an issue last summer and also an issue this summer in that the Eastport area did not have access to the AACPS summer food program. And a sort of solution was worked out with the Maryland Food Bank. But that came with its own issues in terms of accessibility and the food offered and just some communication issues between the food bank where they were going to be and what the school system was sending out. And so we had a good meeting that it included Dr. Tobin, Dr. Alato, Mr. Mosier, and Alderman Gay, there were just a bunch of people that came and we had a good meeting. However, I think this is something that we really need to discuss going forward. There are, and try to have this be something that we look at and make sure that all of the schools and the communities within our school system are met by food programs that are being offered going forward. If AACPS is offering it to some of the schools in our community, I really feel like they need to offer it to all of the students in our community, because as was brought up during the meeting, the school system is the only organization that has direct connection with the families of children in our community. So the city can put out posts on, social media or send out emails, but the school system is the only, or so can the county and et cetera, but the school system is the only organization that can directly communicate with all of the families of students in our city. And that because of that, they, unfortunately, maybe for them, have to be that connector. And so we had this problem last summer with Eastport and with the Clay Street area and some of our other areas. And there's always a sort of gap between some of the community centers where food is being provided, but only the people who, live in that particular community or attend programs at that community can access that food. And then families who live nearby that, who are then sort of included in with being able to access that food, but they're not actually able to access that food. And so making sure that that doesn't happen going forward, I think is something we really need to focus on, making sure that information is getting out in a timely and accurate manner to all of our students, I think was a thing that we discussed. It was an important thing that we discussed. And, just in general, starting this process earlier on and really making sure that all of our various communities needs are being met. So I think as we go forward, the school system starts working on it basically on October 1st, when they learn about where the free and reduced, when that's the official date for free and reduced meals in the community. And then more so in the late winter But I think that that's something that we need to, as a commission, maybe meet with them early in 2022, find out what the plans are, the tentative plans are for food for next summer, and where that is going to be. One of the, we learned a lot about the different programs and the way that it works. And one of the things we learned is that food is generally offered where a summer program is being held, which is great because that's where the kids are. And food staff is not a 12-month position. But the problem with that is that there are certain schools that very rarely have the summer programs. So therefore, those communities never have the food. And the other thing that came up was the mobile food sites, which are very successful, but don't really hit a wide swath of communities. In some case, are hitting 3 sites within a mile of each other. And so what can be done to look at those and make sure that they're really accessing or making it accessible for everybody? And, you know, if providing more transportation or finding another vehicle to service the families in the city is something that maybe the city and the school system need to work on together if the school system doesn't have their own vehicles, or maybe that's something that we as a commission need to advocate to the school system to provide another vehicle so that lack of transportation for the food is not a reason to not provide food to students in our community. And please feel free to add whatever I forgot.
Jess, are we supposed to meet again in March in the delegates' offices to make actual decisions?
Yes, we are supposed to do that. So that's why I think it's important, you know, that we discuss as our commission, and maybe for everybody within your different wards can find out from your schools and your community what worked and what didn't work in terms of food access this summer. And we can, you know, collect that information and then have a more well-rounded for when we meet with the delegation and the school system in March. So maybe if this can be on the agenda in like January or February, January maybe, just to follow up, and then that gives us another month to do anything else we need to do before our meeting.
Any questions?
So, Jess, I know at the beginning of the summer there were issues with certain sites not getting food reliably. You know, in the last, I know we're to the end of the summer, but are all the sites that are being advertised receiving meals regularly as of today?
As far as I'm aware, I haven't heard anything negative about it in the last couple of weeks, and I have seen the Maryland Food Bank truck on occasion. I mean, when I've been there, so we have seen that. My kids have started going to Georgetown East because we have the luxury of transportation to drive us to Georgetown East, as that the school system's meals are a little bit more substantial than the food bank's meals, so we've had the ability to go there and pick up our lunches from there, but that's also part of the discussion. Does anyone else have any other questions? Okay.
Okay, seeing no other discussion. Next up on the agenda is meeting plans for 2021-2022 school year. But given we do not know yet if we will be able to meet in schools, or do we know how COVID will be in a few months, I thought it was better to just decide about our September meeting, and then we can have a fuller discussion about commission meetings at the September meeting. So all of that said, the Board of Education shifted its meeting to the 4th Wednesday, so I am proposing we stay virtual with public access for September and either meet on September 15th or September 29th if we want to stick to a Wednesday for next month.
I'd vote for the September 15th date, please.
What did you say, Janet?
September 15th.
Can someone confirm that you can hear me? Can you talk back to me and let me know?
I hear you now.
Yes, we can hear you, Janet.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just said I'd vote for the September 15th date, please.
That one does not conflict with any of the back to school nights in our cluster. So just something to keep in mind.
I would second
Looks
the
like it's
motion.
available on the city calendar, but I have to check with Mark to confirm. But it looks like it'll be fine.
Can you tell if Alderman Finlayson has any meetings on that day that are there any commission, like any of the meetings that boards that
There's
she's on?
an Environmental Matters Committee, but I don't think she serves on that. They're done at 5 anyway. They're 3 to 5, and then Board of Appeals meets at 7. So she wouldn't normally have any reason to be before Board of Appeals, but I can't see the rest of her schedule.
Okay. Does anyone here have her? I mean, that sounds like a good day if we're not conflicting with anything public for Alderman Finlayson, and we're not conflicting with any Board of Ed or back to school nights. September 15th sounds like a win.
Should we make a motion or just?
Indy is responding for those who are awake, can't see.
If there's no objection, we can just confirm the 15th.
I have a question. I know you said, okay, this one will be virtual. I mean, what are the feelings of the committee about meeting virtually versus in person? I mean, going into the schools, I'm sure they're going to have to do some extra things as far as disinfecting and things like that. Is there an advantage to us meeting in person, or what are your feelings about being virtual until this variant is cleared away? What are you all feeling about that? Because I mean, we get everything accomplished except for maybe, the community input, which I thought we were working on. I thought was going to be cleared up by this time.
I think having virtual is a great idea. I would like to continue it going forward regardless. I mean, we could do some in person and have a computer there with a camera, because I really think that, especially given our audience, and they generally tend to be parents who have children, that, they're able to watch it and participate ideally. I thought we were also going to do that, and I don't know how exactly it works. Hillary, you might have to explain. Does somebody have to register in advance to be a public participant? Because the way that our meetings in the past worked is that everybody was just there in one meeting and, could raise their hand and ask questions when, like when STAIR was giving their report or various things, which if we can do that virtually, then I think virtual is a great option.
I agree.
As long as people request to be on the meeting ahead of time, then it's no problem to have them available for whatever part of the meeting that you want them. But for security reasons, we have to have people pre-register. They can't show up during the meeting because we don't know who they are, and we won't let people in if we don't know who they are. Pre-register, that's fine.
I did hear back that the schools will not let anyone in right now. Jo Lynn told me to check back with her in October.
I just want to say that I think one of the pieces that we miss by this is not having the principals. You know, usually we would go to different schools and we would hear about this, you know, what was going on in that particular school building. But there is absolutely nothing to stop us from inviting the principals to come and speak to us. And it might even be, you know, we could still do that even if we're not physically meeting in the school buildings, which would get the piece of the puzzle that I think we would miss by remaining virtual.
I agree.
I agree.
And invite the PTA too.
Yes. I'd like to get the PTAs involved more in general. I think that we can play a very valuable role in cluster communication between schools and PTAs. And I think that really should be one of our focuses this year, is to get the PTA as involved as possible. I would say if anybody signs up and they have PTA at the end of their name, please let them in.
Could we or should we set up another committee for one of our standing committees, make one that interfaces with the PTA, because then they could meet with PTA representatives outside of our monthly meetings to gather information about issues that individual schools, because you know, my experience is that when you have a kid at a school, you are very aware of the issues in that school. But, you know, for those of us that don't have a kid, like I've never had a kid at Mills Parole, so I don't know what's going on at Mills Parole, but I'm sure, you know, the PTA there would have has their finger on the pulse of what that particular school is dealing with. So if we had a standing committee that would maybe have a meeting, not necessarily even monthly, but, you know, periodically with PTA leaders, then we could maybe get some better feedback about things that are specifically, you know, happening at specific schools and ways that we can interface to assist with those issues.
That sounds good. So it's not just me emailing the cluster every month.
I think it would also be helpful if each if each commissioner could reach out to the PTAs or the schools in their group and figure out what's going on at the PTAs in those regions. Obviously, the benefit of the 2 middle schools and the high school, we don't have anybody. I mean, I'm on the PTSA, but I'm not and in terms of the middle schools, both Laura and I are on the PTA boards at the middle schools. So that's helpful in terms of schools that cover multiple wards. And I can certainly be help share information from the high school as needed. But I think that's a great idea, Laura. I think that's great.
I'm chairing the start times, but since that's not a really overwhelming position, I would be happy to chair that committee if we're looking for taking volunteers.
I'd be happy to be on that committee since I'm in 3 of the PTAs anyway.
Jess, you are that committee all by yourself.
Mhm.
But we'll help you out.
Would anyone else like to be on the PTA connection, whatever we want to call it, committee?
I will be. Okay, I think we are good with meetings. Next up is safety protocols for the upcoming school year, and we can start with a discussion on the current Aacps protocols.
How do we want to start this discussion? Laura, do you want to
I
start?
believe some people had motions.
We could start by crying. I don't know. So far, it looks like the mask requirement is going to stay. So all schools, all students at all schools, regardless of vaccination status, will have to wear a mask. There is efforts by at least 2 of the board members to remove the mask mandate. So I think the first motion that we might want to consider would be affirming our support for the AACPS mask mandate as it stands currently, just to make sure that if there is discussion about possibly removing it, that we are on record as being in favor of it. Lots of discussion on that.
I would agree. I know that the majority of the families at Eastport would like, that I've spoken to, would like a masking mandate for safety reasons. I think just in general, I mean, I think that's what the CDC has said, and I'm hoping, I mean, hopefully we don't even have to have this discussion, because hopefully the Maryland Department of State, MSDE, is going to mandate masks. I know there's a meeting coming up, so, you know, hopefully that, and then, because what my feeling is that the masking discussion, which is a fairly sensible discussion, is really taking away from the conversation, taking the air out of the room for the conversation about the other additional safety issues that we need to look into and that we need to make sure are being handled, and not just meeting the bare minimums set forth by the CDC and Maryland MSDE, but also going above them to make sure, because what I'm concerned about, and what I keep hearing from people in my ward and at my schools, is that they don't necessarily feel comfortable right now with what this regulations are for going back to school, particularly in terms of cafeterias and lack of virtual the quarantining, and in general contact tracing and everything else. And so I feel like whatever we can do, if our goal is to get people back in the classrooms, and we want to get people back in the classrooms, then we need to make it safe enough for people to feel safe to send their children back to the classrooms. Because if we're not doing that, then our school system is failing the goal of getting people back in the classrooms. So while some people may feel, there was somebody said today, the school superintendent, some people may feel that it's overreacting to doing too much, but I'd rather overreact than underreact, and find out, you know, oh, we overreacted and we did more than we needed to, than underreact and have there be a problem because of it. That's just my general.
No, I totally agree with you, Jess, there. I think it's important to keep in mind that specifically within our cluster, I don't think we ever hit 50% of families feeling comfortable sending their students back in the buildings in the spring. So the majority of parents in our cluster kept their kids home last year because they didn't feel comfortable sending them back into the schools. And that was with social distancing, with hybrid learning taking place. So, you know, students weren't even going 40s, they were just going part-time. So we had fewer kids in the buildings, they were more spread out. And right now we're looking at sending kids back at full capacity. So those classrooms, as we know in our cluster, those classrooms tend to be overcrowded. So we've got kids that there's no way that they're going to be able to distance them now the way they could in the spring. I mean, kids are going to be, our lunchrooms, for example, Annapolis High, I think was forecast to have about 2,200 students this year. The lunchroom in Annapolis High, I believe, has a fire marshal capacity of 550 students. Now, there are only 3 lunch periods at the high school. Sometimes there's only 2 lunch periods, but they spread the kids out throughout the building for Panther hours, so that will help. But those kids are going to be sitting, you know, shoulder to shoulder in the lunchroom, and that's a concern. We also don't have any accurate numbers. We have no idea how many students who are eligible for a vaccine have actually received them. I mean, we know students 12 and up are eligible, but we have no idea of the 2,200 students, say at Annapolis High, what percentage of them are actually vaccinated. Most of our low-income communities here in Annapolis have very, very low vaccination rates. I have a friend with the National Guard who has been trying to set up pop-up vaccination centers in some of our communities, because areas like there are parts of the city like Clay Street where there's just a very, very low number of residents who have been vaccinated. So that's another concern. You know, our vaccination rate compared to, you know, at Annapolis High, we have an overcrowded building and not a lot of kids vaccinated. That, you know, in the current, the Delta variant and everything spreading around is a serious concern. We need to somehow reassure families that it's safe to send their kids back to school, but we need I think the AACPS needs to be doing more to convince families that it's safe to send their kids back to school, because I know a lot of families that are, and they're not families that normally would traditionally homeschool, but are determined to homeschool their kids this year because they just are not comfortable sending their kids back into the building.
So do we have an actual motion on the mask issue?
I was just wondering, is there any leeway at all for schools to determine how they're going to do lunch? I mean, I did see in the paper where it's going to be masks, but at lunchtime, we're going to all go in the cafeteria and eat together and take off our masks. I mean, that's the time when kids will reach over and share food. I mean, is there any leeway or any opportunity for principals and schools to determine a safer way to do that? Or do they not have that decision-making power? Because that's the time, I mean, to me, that defeats the whole purpose.
From what I understand, there are some principals that are trying to come up with leeway, but if you, what I was told is that if we wanted to, we needed to talk to Jolynn and ask her, you know, if there could be, but I agree, Enid. I feel like all principals should be given the leeway to create a space. Like, I don't mind sending my child back to second grade and having him unmasked to eat lunch with his fellow second graders in his second grade class. I have a problem with my second grader eating lunch unmasked with all 60 second graders, right? Or however many second graders there are. That's because that breaks the whole cohort thing.
Right.
He's going to be unmasked. I want him to be unmasked with the same people he's with all the time, so that if there is a case, I know where it came from and is not as exposed to as many people. And, you know, and then in the middle and high school levels, even more so. I think the school system and the schools should be able to do whatever they need to do to provide tenting. I know in Montgomery County, they have, they've encouraged schools to come up with whatever they need to do to provide outside meal times. And, you know, and that's not a cheap thing. I called to see what a tent would cost, and a 15 by 30 tent was going to be about $1,400 a day. So, I mean, $1,400 a month. So it's not an inexpensive thing. And if it is something that we're saying, oh, well, it's up to the school and the PTA, that's great for schools with PTAs with budgets. That doesn't work for schools with PTAs without budgets, which tend to be the more crowded schools. So, and the ones who, you know, who really need this. So I totally agree that's something that should be allowed.
India, I know you asked about the mask issue. Would you like me to put something out there for the masks? Okay. How about the Annapolis Education Commission supports AACPS policy requiring all students and staff, regardless of vaccination status, to wear masks at all times inside AACPS buildings to reduce the risk of COVID transmission.
I would second the motion.
Could you repeat that?
Sure. The Annapolis Education Commission supports AACPS policy requiring all students and staff, regardless of vaccination status, to wear masks at all times inside AACPS buildings to reduce the risk of COVID transmission.
And Enid, just for clarity, we will get to a motion on the lunch issue after this.
I would second that motion, though I'm wondering if we should say something about, I don't know how to include lunches without saying, but we don't want it free for all lunches. And also the music classes that they have exceptions, right? They have exemptions. The school system has exemptions. So do we want to include those exemptions, or do we just want to do all mask at all times?
And I'm really fuzzy on the exemptions because like they said that music students could be exempted, but like I know, for example, at Annapolis High School, they bought very specific masks for all the music instruments. So like any of the woodwinds or whatever, you know, and they're all different because obviously a clarinet, you need the hole in the front to put the instrument in, and the flute has a side entry mask. So there are specialized masks for all of the instruments. And I know, the high school purchased them and they were using them. So I don't know how many of those exemptions are actually being used. If we have specialized masks for students that are participating in those types of activities, then they are going to be masked during those activities. I mean, they'll be briefly, unmasking to take their regular mask off and then putting their music, or, if they've got special ones for drama, maybe that have the support for mics on stage or something like that. I don't know how often those exemptions are really going to come into play.
I also just so everyone's aware. So I was just reading from the school system website, and they are also being exempted in terms of strenuous activity, engaging in strenuous exercise, which I feel like that should only be a option outside, right? I don't want my kid playing strenuous basketball inside in the CAFA gymnasium and not masked, right? I mean, that's my personal. So maybe we just leave it as is, and I'll second the motion as is.
I was just thinking, I don't know how to work that in there. I just think we're just saying we support your masking policy, so we do not support efforts to remove the masking policy as stated.
I agree. I don't know how we could cover music, exercise, eating lunch. I just don't know how we could put that all in a recommendation.
I do think we could do a separate motion for lunch. So I think let's get through this and then we can talk about possibly doing something for lunch.
I would just stay with masking in general to avoid any legal loopholes.
So I second the motion as written.
Any further discussion on this motion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any objection? Motion passes.
Regarding lunch, I had an idea for a motion for the lunch. The Annapolis Education Commission urges AACPS to reduce the risk of COVID transmission by encouraging students to eat lunch outdoors or in classrooms in small cohorts to reduce the number of unmasked students congregating in school cafeterias.
I second that motion.
You say it again, Jess. I'm sorry.
Yeah, could you repeat that?
Yep. The Annapolis Education Commission urges AACPS to reduce the risk of COVID transmission by encouraging students to eat lunch outdoors or in classrooms in small cohorts to reduce the number of unmasked students congregating in school cafeterias.
Okay, open for discussion. Do we just want to vote?
Sure, let's vote.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm in favor.
Aye.
My hand's not going up.
Any objection?
You're muted, Jeff.
Here we go. I oppose that.
Any abstain? Okay, motion passes.
Does anybody have any numbers on how many students are going to be in the what is it called, virtual school? Do we have numbers on that at all?
I think that was capped at about 500. I want to say 550. I don't know, that number sticking in my head, but it was a limited number of students compared to the 85,000 in the county.
Only 550?
They may have opened it again, but I think it was still no more than six something. Then there is also the e-school at Monarch, which is another option. And the benefit about the e-school at Monarch is that, from what I understand, you can join, you don't have to commit to it for an entire year. So they ask you to give them a month's notice before you return to your homeschool. I think that's part of the virtual academy. The concern that some families had was you really had to leave your homeschool. If you were in PBA or an IB or any sort of magnet program, you had to remove yourself from that. And there was no guarantee you're going to get back into that program when you return to your school, whatever school you're at. So I think that was a big concern. But so the e-school, I don't know about how that relates with the magnet programs, but I do know that I think there's more flexibility in a year versus a month versus a year, or a couple months versus a year, waiting to see what happens with the pandemic versus leaving.
And the virtual academy started at, I believe, 3rd grade and up. So if you had a, kindergarten through 2nd grader, and that the only option for you really is the e-school at Monarch, because the county virtual school didn't offer options for students that young.
So basically the e-school at Monarch is,
it was set up to be electronic, where the idea was originally that students would only come into the building, I think, either once a week or once every other week, but primarily would be online. Last year, the students in the eSchool remained online all year and never returned to the building, even when we went hybrid in the spring, they stayed electronic. So for parents who just aren't comfortable right now with their kids coming in at all, there is no in-building requirement for the eSchool at Monarch.
And they have a capacity of what, 600 now?
The eSchool was smaller than the school. All of Monarch is, I think, about 800. But the eSchool last year they had about 100, but they were planning on offering an individual class for each grade this year. So they accommodate six grades. So I mean, if you figure 25, 30 kids per class, it's bigger now than it was last year. And they did have seats available. I don't know if they have seats at all grades, but I know that I have seen recently that there were still seats available at the school. So if families were seeking a virtual option for their students, particularly those in K through 2 who aren't eligible for the virtual school in the county, should contact Monarch. Just call the office at Monarch if they're interested.
Yeah, I think I think I saw them actively advertising, though that again only goes to 5th grade. It doesn't go 6 through 12. I would say one of the things that I've really been advocating for in all of my communications with the board is I understand and I fully support returning to the classroom 5 days a week. And I also understand that the hybrid, as the way it was set up last year, was not an ideal situation. But hybrid, as it was set up last year during Aacps, is not the only way of doing hybrid. And there are plenty of schools across the country that even before COVID offered a hybrid option where using technology like 360-degree cameras and 360-degree audio systems and microphones in the classroom, where a teacher didn't have to teach to the laptop like today, like last year's hybrid in Anne Arundel County taught to the laptop. I strongly believe that the school system needs to invest in that technology, and particularly right now. If you've looked at the reopening plan, so everyone knows we're moving to this new learning management module called Brightspace, and that's a new. And so what's going to happen is that if your family has to quarantine, or your family has COVID, your child is sick, or your family has to quarantine for contact tracing or whatever else, it's an asynchronous learning method. It's going to be lessons that are going to be posted in Brightspace. There's going to be 1 or 2 times a day the student can check in with a virtual educator, but it's not an educator from their home school. And it's all asynchronous. And I think we all experienced asynchronous in 2020 and know how difficult that was, particularly for our students who don't have parents at home, whose parents are working from home or working at home, but they can't be sitting there helping, making sure their kids are doing the work. And also for our families that have limited English language capabilities. And so, I really feel that the school system needs to have technology in the classroom so that if I'm a student and I'm at home, I can at the very least log in and see what's happening in my classroom. And if I have questions, I can send them to my teacher through Brightspace or through Google Classroom, however it is, but I at least can connect and be here and be part of what's happening in the classroom in some way, just like it's done in other schools and college classrooms around the world, really. So, I'm not saying that we need to go all virtual, but I think that also for, especially these first few weeks that are coming up, when there's a lot of concern about the Delta variant and about our unvaccinated children, so that we keep families within our school system and provide them an option. If a family doesn't feel that they're safe, or say they have an immunocompromised or sick person at home, that they don't have to withdraw from school because we don't have an option for them to somehow attend school during a pandemic. I really feel that that's really important. And then also for people who have to quarantine for 10, 14 days, however long it might be. We don't want to have them lose education because they're quarantining. And I don't think that the asynchronous model is going to be beneficial for the large majority of our children if they have to quarantine.
Yeah, I just can't, I mean, I can't imagine how kids can stay up with a class. I mean, even before COVID, if a kid missed school for a couple of days, because, you know, even if they were on a field trip, it was hard for kids to get caught up with all that material, especially like at the middle school level or the high school level where they've got, you know, lots of classes that they're juggling. So there's not one place to go for missed work. And the school system's approach with Brightspace seems to be, oh, you can get all of your assignments, which is fine. Yes, you can get your assignments, but for a kid who's struggling in algebra to begin with and now has to quarantine for 10 days, just having access to the worksheet you're supposed to complete doesn't give you the tools you need to actually complete the workshop. Like or the worksheet, if you haven't had the benefit of the lesson, you don't know how to do the assignment. And for kids that end up having, I mean, the school system seems to be approaching it from the angle that they've really reduced how they identify close contacts. Like you have to be more than 15 minutes, closer than 3 feet unmasked. I mean, it's very, very specific. So if a kid sits in a classroom all day long next to a kid 3 feet away from a kid who is COVID positive, as long as they were both wearing masks, you know, you won't have to quarantine. So I guess their idea was that, oh, we won't have many kids quarantining this year. You know, like the kid who's sick would stay home, but the rest of them won't. But that doesn't really, in my opinion, take into account the fact that kids are, you know, kids have other contacts besides school. So kids may be quarantining because I was at a family reunion this weekend and somebody tested positive, or I played soccer and someone on my team tested positive. There are lots of reasons why families, you know, kids may have to quarantine for periods of time, or siblings. Yeah, someone in my younger brother or sister's class tested positive, so our whole family's quarantining. So there, I think that the school system's approach seems to be that they don't expect very many kids to have to quarantine. And that also means that then parents can't choose if they feel uncomfortable for whatever reason, you know, to keep their kids home. They're not they don't want to provide families with a mechanism to make that choice to say, oh, you know what, I'm more comfortable keeping my kid home this week. But the end result is that if families do keep kids home, those kids could fall hopelessly behind. We're already dealing with learning loss, you know, from this is what I don't understand the conflict here is. Last year we had synchronous learning, but virtual, and the school system said, well, that's not good enough. You have to go in person this year. But the fallback, you know, for kids that are quarantined is asynchronous virtual. Well, if synchronous virtual wasn't good enough last year, 10 days of asynchronous virtual isn't good enough this year. So how are we preventing learning loss from, you know, the kids that, and we know how it is, that certain kids that once they fall behind, may never catch up. You know, kids that fall behind in math or reading may stay behind. And, you know, we know this, we know going forwards that there are going to be, you know, possible negative outcomes for them, you know, farther down the line. So what are we doing? And is Aacps doing enough to prevent learning loss this year?
What about the buses? What have we heard about kids traveling on buses and how they're supposed to be limiting number of kids on a seat, but I know that we didn't heard anything.
No, full
The only thing they're
capacity
doing is
buses.
masking.
Full capacity buses, they're supposed to wear masks, but buses will be operating at full capacity, which is 2.5 students per seat at the elementary level and 2 students per seat middle school and high school. So we could have, you know, elementary school kids will be expected in some cases to sit 3 to a seat.
And I think it's
As of
also
yesterday, there also are still over 100 teaching positions that are vacant. So I think the school system is worried that they don't have enough support, so are relying on just having assignments online.
So, and that's another thing to bring up, the way that the program is supposed to work is that if a teacher has to quarantine, then they are supposed to teach virtually from home with a substitute in the classroom who just monitors to make sure the children are connecting online. And I think it's also important to note that we aren't going into this blindly. Schools have been open in the rest of the country and parts of the rest of the country for almost a month. And I think we can all see what has been happening across the country in terms of school systems having to quarantine, children having to quarantine, children, schools, districts being shut down and having to go back to virtual. And I think the other thing that's important to note is that if there is not a synchronous virtual option, I think parents who have a sick child, but are not able to sit there and help with the asynchronous and are not able to be a part of it, are going to take the risk of sending that sick child to school and not notifying the school that that child is sick or that child has been exposed. Because, I mean, we all have to be honest with where we are and childcare and the way our family society is set up in the United States. And, you know, if you don't have something to do with your child and you don't have some way that they're going to be connected and learning, then you might take that risk for your family because it's what is the best thing for your family, which in the end could be the worst thing for other families. And I think that that's something we need to acknowledge as well. I currently have 4 different friends in different states that our kids are back in school and already are quarantining. And one of them, the district has gone back full time, you know, and that just seems, you know, it's not an anomaly that this is happening. And I think we need to take that into account.
Any other motions related to the protocols before moving to the air purifiers?
I could make a motion about the technology if that is, the Annapolis Education Commission urges Aacps to employ necessary technology to allow students to participate in lessons virtually from home during quarantine periods in order to reduce quarantine learning loss and help students stay on pace with their peers. I think maybe we should say participate synchronously in lessons virtually from home. The Annapolis Education Commission urges Aacps to employ necessary technology to allow students to participate synchronously in lessons virtually from home during quarantine periods in order to reduce quarantine learning loss and help students stay on pace with their peers. Does that sound?
I would add something about at their home school.
Yeah, at their home school. To allow students to participate in lessons synchronously and virtually at their home school from home during quarantine periods in order to reduce quarantine learning loss and help students stay on pace with their peers.
Is there a second?
I'll second if no one else has.
Any discussion?
Yeah, Andy, let me jump in here. Jess, I certainly appreciate your interest in wanting not to lead anybody behind. But your motion here suggests that there isn't a cost associated with running a synchronous classroom at the same time. You know, I've been in the classroom the past year and a half, and I will tell you that running a split hybrid class is really, really, really hard. And this, you know, this motion is basically telling the school system that you need to prepare for all teachers to do this at the drop of a pen, both with technology and with teacher planning. I don't think that's the right answer. And yes, I understand that there's a peril of leaving some people behind who get ill. But I just can't support a demand like that. And I think one other thing, in a more general sense, I'm worried that motions like this that are county-wide. You know, this is a Board of Education decision. This isn't something specific to the Annapolis cluster. And I'm worried that by spending time redebating things that really are the preserve of Riva Road, that we're taking away time that we are spending talking about Annapolis-centric issues. So I'm not in favor of this proposal.
mean, for the record, I think this affects the Annapolis cluster more than it affects probably most other places in the county. Our students tend to be, because of the poverty levels within our schools, our families tend to not have paid time off. They don't have health insurance. They don't have access to a lot of the things that all of us sitting here have, as well as the majority of the people in the rest of the county. And so I think that whatever we can do, I mean, if I need to amend it, then say specifically within the Annapolis cluster, I'm happy to do that. I mean, I think it's something we should do around. But I'd also say that other school systems did this last year and they did it fine. And, you know, I understand that it might have been difficult for you in your classroom, but I know people in school systems throughout Florida and other schools where they went back to school starting in September and did not do a full virtual thing, or they went back and forth, and using the technology that's available, they were able to do it well and in a way that worked for both the teachers and the students, both the ones in the classrooms and at home. There is a way to do it. It's not, we're not inventing a new wheel. And to be honest, it's really the right thing to do in the future, I think, as well, because I think, you know, we have a lot of problems with attendance and we have a lot of problems with connecting our students and getting them into the classroom, particularly in our cluster. And I think anything that we can do to increase access to the classrooms and to education for our students, particularly all the discussions that we've had over the opportunity gap, this is the opportunity gap, right? If you can't make it into a classroom because your family's quarantining, and your family's quarantining from anywhere between 10 and 14, sometimes longer days, depending on, you know, if one person gets sick and then 6 days later, the next person tests positive, that could be a month that you're out of school. And that's a month of education loss. And I don't think that any of our students need to have that, particularly those who don't have the resources that some of us here do.
I'd just like to add, I agree, Jess, that this is a huge opportunity gap, and we already have students like at Annapolis High. A year ago, we had 386 students on the academic ineligibility list, so they could not play sports until they remediated that. And just the compounding factors that letting our kids' grades slip closes so many doors of opportunity to them. There are scholarships only available if you have a 3.0 or better. There are scholarships, you know. So it shuts down so much of their future to have these things that derail them. You know, they have enough pressures in life. To have a class that academically derails them is not feasible when we do see school systems all across the country handling this much better. And obviously we know there is a cost, and we want the school system to investigate that cost and tell us why this is not an achievement gap issue that they're ignoring.
I would agree, Janet. And you know, it's not only access to things like athletics, it's also access to Cat North and Cat South. If your GPA isn't of a certain level, you can't access that. So the very students that we're trying to reach that are in the opportunity gap, we're now even cutting more of their access to opportunities.
Right. Having gone through the college application process multiple times, the amount of money that gets thrown at you for very small changes in your GPA is vastly different. And so the privilege of those who can access that through GPAs is very unfair, and the school system should be not compounding that problem.
I was told today that over 20 players on the football team are ineligible because they couldn't get into summer school. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I mean, summer school was full.
Yeah, I believe that, Odessa. I believe that number and maybe more, because a friend of mine tried to get her son into summer school. It was not a straightforward process. It was not so easy. It was not well advertised. To make up for a failing grade he had on a core subject he needed to pass to get his diploma. So I can see how many kids slip through there, and we need to do better on that.
My question is for Jeff. All the public or all the private schools in Anne Arundel County, of which there are many, almost all of them were open throughout last fall, when we were closed, or, if they were closed, it was very briefly and then they opened up. So how were they able to do that? Because, I have one of my neighbors has a son that attends Severn, and he had to quarantine 3 separate times because kids that he came in contact with were tested positive for COVID. So he was taking, I guess, pre-algebra. And she commented to me at one point that, if it hadn't been for the fact that he could rotate and go virtual, but still follow the lessons, there's no way that her son would have been able to keep up with his studies. So my question is, what is it that the private schools around us are doing that they're making this work somehow? So are there ways that we could make it work, or are there ways that, they're doing something and they're making it work? I guess my question is, I always, you feel in the public schools, why can't we have that? But what is it that we need here in AACPS that would make us be able to support students the way the private schools have been supporting students? Aside from boatloads of money.
I'm sorry, Laura, was that question directed toward me?
Sort of. It was just sort of, the private schools are making it work somehow. So what's the secret? How is it that they're able to make it work, but it's impossible to make it work here?
Well, if the question is directed at me, as I looked around Anne Arundel County and I saw how much less risk averse the private schools were, and I found myself somewhat envious that they were allowing in-person education that I think most everyone agrees is a much more effective way of teaching people, and yet we were still stuck in a mandatory distance education. I think whatever we need to do to get people in the classroom, in my opinion, is a good thing, and I'm very happy to see that we're, moving in that direction back toward, in the classroom direction this academic year.
In my discussions with private schools, the majority of them offered a virtual or a partial virtual option using the technologies that I'm suggesting. So a student could be in classroom, or they could choose to be virtual, or they could choose to be 2 weeks in, 2 weeks. They could switch back and forth depending on what their family situation, quarantining, that type of thing, using this technology. It's not new technology. It's not particularly expensive. And the school system has the benefit of having large amounts of grants available right now with ESSR and everything else, or ESR, for these types of technologies. And again, these technologies are not teaching to the laptop. These technologies are cameras and audio systems within the classroom that allow a teacher to teach normally to the kids in the classroom, but allow the virtual students to connect in. And that's what most of the most of the private schools that were able to do this and do it well, they had this technology.
I totally agree with you, Jeff, that the goal should be to get students in the class. My concern is that if there's no way to support them via quarantine, that parents are going to send kids in when they maybe shouldn't be, when they might be contagious, and then we'll run the risk of, okay, now the whole class has to shut down, or the whole school, as we've seen in parts of the country where, they just haven't had a good, they've had so many kids coming in positive that they can't stay open anymore. Or they have so many teachers out that they can't find enough subs to cover. So then they have to shut down. So anything that we can do to support students, my understanding of the way that the private schools were able to remain open was that they were allowing families to kind of pivot as needed, rather than forcing an all or nothing approach at the school level. They allowed families flexibility to say, hey, you need to be at home this week. Fine, you can be at home, but we'll still support you. And so we're able to stay open because of that. And I feel like the all or nothing approach is going to allow too many kids. And my background, as you know, is mathematics, and I just can't imagine a kid who has to quarantine 2 or 3 times, during a year of algebra ever able to I mean, because it's when he comes back to the class, it's not like, oh, he has time when you come back to the class to catch up. The class has moved on. You know, you've missed 10 days of class, but the class has moved ahead 10 days. So now you're supposed to be making up 10 days of work that you missed, but at the same time, still keeping up with the class as it's moving forward. And I don't see that possible, you know, specifically thinking about math. I mean, it's one thing if you're in a history class and you miss the American Revolution, that's okay. You can still, you know, you're still good for the Civil War because they don't build as much on each other. But in math classes,
well, I think here it's okay to have a difference of opinion here, but I don't think you're framing it correctly as an all or nothing. I mean, they have provided an asynchronous option, which I think is fine. Let those students learn in the classroom setting, in the most optimal setting. And if they can't make it for some reason, then there's a backup asynchronous version. I personally think that's the right policy, and that we ought to support what the school system in this case has come up with.
Any additional discussion?
I just want to say, I think we also have to recognize that there are significant socioeconomic differences between the students at private schools and the students at public schools. So you can't really compare them. It's not apples and apples, because the majority of students at private schools have insurance. They have health insurance. Their parents work jobs that offer paid time off. They have the resources available to them to help weather storms like being quarantined for 10 days or a month. And that's not necessarily the same with parents in public schools.
Okay, moving to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Janet says aye.
Enid, are you there?
Any objection? Any abstain? So is that 4-2.
I think it was 5-2 if Janet was in favor.
Janet voted aye.
Did you get my vote? I voted aye.
Okay, so 6-2.
Okay, so motion passes. Jess, did you want to kick off the discussion on air purifiers?
Yes. So I don't know if you all saw, does anyone else have any discussions? Sorry, any things regarding the health and safety, or do we want to wrap that into the air purifier discussion and go forward? Okay. So, BCPS has offered to provide air purifiers for all classrooms in their school system. And that is something that has been recommended by the CDC and other organizations regarding COVID and keeping classrooms safe. And again, doing what we can do to keep them as safe as possible to get as many kids back into the class and not having to quarantine and not having to have kids get sick. And I know that at Eastport Elementary, we provided purifiers for our classrooms, our graded classrooms, because cultural arts were not in person last year. And it was not an inexpensive option. And the school system has said that they are not providing purifiers for any classrooms, but PTAs or communities are welcome to do so if they want. But again, within the Annapolis cluster, there are a number of schools that, or at least a few schools that do not have PTAs, or if they do have a PTA, it's a fairly low budget PTA. And so I was thinking that maybe this is something that the Education Commission and the City of Annapolis and could work on together to support our schools. And with the backing of or help from Aacps, and see what we can do to outfit all of our classrooms, our student-facing classrooms, whether it's grade classrooms or media centers or art or special ed, with air purifiers for the health and safety, not only of the students, but also of the staff, and with the goal of reducing the amount of quarantining, because we're reducing the number of positive COVID cases. I know that the school system has said that the HVACs are, have been ventilated and what have you, but even with that, given Delta, the CDC has, said that, and has MSDE said that the use of air purifiers is something that will help. It will just be one of those additional layers that will help with the reduction of COVID transmission within the classroom. And so I wanted to see what everyone thought about that and how we might be able to work on that. And if that's something, maybe that's something, we talk a lot about how we don't, we've talked a lot about what we can do as a commission to actively do something for our schools. And I think that this is something that we could actively do and work with the city. And, I know there's grants and there's COVID money out there that maybe we can use, and then community assistance to try to get this, to make it safer for our students and our teachers in our classrooms.
Thanks, Jess. Those are great ideas. I just want to remind people of the level of disparity. So Annapolis High School PTA had a budget that was approximately about $9,500 per year compared to our surrounding sister schools of Broadneck or Smyrna Park or South River High School, whose PTA budgets were in the $40,000 to $60,000 a year category. So, why should their students be blessed with better health than our PTA's resources allow? Thanks.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on this, or whether this is something that we could, sustainably do within the commission in the city? Hillary, is there, do you know if there's, one of the departments or that within the city that might be able to work with this on, this kind of initiative?
Is there a grants officer within the city that could help all the PTAs write the grants for these? If there's quick turnaround grants?
The assistant city manager, Lynn Farrow, works on grants. We do have grant writers in a few different departments as well. A lot of the COVID money went to the county as opposed to the city. So we could inquire with the county as well, but I think it would be hard to ask them for something that's just for city schools. I don't know if they have any plans in the pipeline for schools throughout the county, but we could ask them.
City residents are county residents also, so.
Yes, indeed. I understand. I just meant if we were advocating specifically for city schools, it would be a little bit more challenging. We do have our community group now as well, and so they might be able to help with this.
If we could just help some strapped PTAs apply for those grants, if someone could find out about the quick turnaround grants, and then help the PTAs apply for those.
Well, I asked Lisa Ravi in because someone called me up. The local football team needed some shirts or something. And I met with that group, ACT, the church group called ACT, in April, and they were trying to figure out what to do with the $112 million that the county executive was getting from COVID, I think. I think it was COVID money or whatever it was. And so anyway, I read in the paper that they spent 54 million. So I emailed Lisa Ravi and asked them, well, where did the money go? So now they have $54 million left over, and they're still trying to figure out how to spend it. I don't understand why it's not getting to these neighborhood organizations like us and other people. I mean, like, where is the money going? $112 million. I mean, it's not probably a lot of money, but it is a lot of money. It was extra money that was supposed to have been spent for the community, the county.
Those are good questions, Rebecca.
And then we met in April, and no one has come out and say, where the money went. And then so when I emailed Lisa Ravi, and she said, yeah, but they still got more money, so anybody need money to apply for it.
I wonder if our 501c3 PTAs would qualify for what they're giving out.
I think so. It's supposed to have been for the county executive was trying to figure out how to spend the money. And then when you suggest how to spend the money, nobody seems to know where the money is. It's just crazy.
And this is
I'm
clearly
sure
a COVID.
very
Oh, no, it was
It's
part of
probably
the
very
rescue
specific
plan. It was the
categories.
rescue plan.
But there's probably very specific categories under which it could be spent, and you might have to have nonprofit status and other things, but the PTAs do have that. So it's worth somebody pursuing if we can do an action item on that, please.
I just think that somebody should be letting the community, the PTAs and people know, that, get out there and just make sure that these poor organizations get some of that money. And they got all these people working for them, telling them, that we got the money, but where is the money going? I just would like to know, where is the money going? That's all.
I'm happy to reach out to the county executive's office and find out if they have funding left and if you would qualify.
That's great.
I think another important thing would be, I know that the school system has said the CO, I think it's the CO2 count, I think, is how they determine whether, the air filtration system in a school is adequate. And I know that in some of our other school systems, I don't know if it's Baltimore City, maybe Frederick, where they have an ongoing dashboard with the air filtration systems in the schools. I would love to see the information, particularly for our Annapolis cluster schools, on the actual CO2 counts numbers within the schools, so that we all are aware of where they are, and is that in general the CO2, or did they go in and test every individual school? And if so, where is that information stored and can it be made public? I think that that's something I'd personally like to know.
Particularly for our buildings that were built as open classroom buildings and were later closed in, Annapolis High, Georgetown East. Because those are retrofits, I mean, the system that's in there was designed for a big open room, and they're putting vents and stuff here and there. But the thing about air circulation is that there have to be returns as well as a vent. Just putting a vent in the room may put some cool air in there so that the room is, you feel air conditioned air so it doesn't feel hot. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're having the air circulation, that there's a return that is taking the CO2 out of the room. So I'm curious about that. I'm also wondering about schools like that, like for example, Hillsmere. I don't know if it's the case now, but was when my son was there, had no air conditioning at all in the cafeteria. So for the kids that are expected to sit shoulder to shoulder in the room to eating lunch unmasked, in a room that doesn't have air circulation, that doesn't have, I mean, they have fans when it's hot, but like in when it gets cooler out, they would be sitting in a room with no air filtration at all. So that to me would be a very high concern.
They still have a huge fan.
So where's
And
the $112 million going? My God. Did you all talk about Annapolis High, how they had an explosion over there with the air conditioning? The school is shut down?
So if there's no air conditioning, then there's also no air filtration happening at all. So I think we need to keep an eye on that. If they decide, oh, well, we need to get kids back in the building, so we're going to set up fans. It's not just whether or not the kids are too hot in the rooms without air conditioning. It's also whether or not it's safe for the kids to be in rooms where there isn't any good ventilation and there is no filtration of the air happening at all.
Well, I was told that it was actually an explosion and that the people down by the explosion area, the custodians, they ran out of the building. I think one person got their hand burned or something. So the school has been closed. I'm sure you all are aware of that, right? You know it's going to be closed tomorrow.
Yes, we heard about that. And it's also canceling the SAT exam that's scheduled for the weekend, which is very unfortunate for many of our students.
I know that the American Rescue Plan you can use schools, and I don't know, Hillary, whether the city is able to use American Rescue Plan funds, but they can be used to add individual HEPA filtration units to each classroom. The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health had a post yesterday about this and how important HEPA filtration units were, and particularly having one in each individual classroom. So it's not just parents, it's Hopkins Bloomberg School of Health.
Yeah, I believe those funds went to county, not city but they are for city as well. But the ask would be.
So what's the best way to move forward on this then? If we want this to be an initiative that we want to look into, first of all, does everyone feel that this is, something to look into? And if so, what is the best way to look forward to it? I mean, to do it. Sorry, I have no words.
I think it's an important issue, and yes, I think we need to press on it quickly.
So do we want to see if there is money to request and then put this back on the agenda in September and maybe have our new PTA committee reach out to the schools to see what the status is with the air circulation?
I think we do that. Maybe what we need is the PTA committees to help us figure out how many we need in each classroom. And maybe our commission can ask the school system for the CO2 counts and the things, right, as a bulk thing, since some of our schools don't have PTAs. So that way, at least we can get the information directly from the communications office, whoever we need to, and then move from there. I know I suggested this, but is there anyone who might have time to take this on as sort of the lead from the commission? I can do it, but I don't know how well I'd be able to do it, since I'm also trying to get prepared for the first time of being in 3 different schools at the same time. I'm an exploding head emoji.
I'm sorry, Jess. What is it you trying? What was the question?
Is there someone that's willing to take this on, like to lead this initiative to get the information and work with the city so that on the meeting in September, we can get an update on this and see what can be done in terms of getting purifiers in the classroom. I can do it. I just don't know if I'd be the best person to do it right now. If there's somebody that has the time and ability to take this on.
You're already overloaded, Jess. So if other commission members can step up, that would be preferable.
I mean, I can probably work with it, but I don't even know what a purifier is. I mean, I'm sorry, I was halfway paying attention. I know you all are talking about purifiers in the classroom, the air circulation. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, outfitting individual classrooms with air purifiers that meet the CADR, which is the circulation, for our cluster.
Can we invite someone over from the, I know someone that works in that, the chief custodian or something like that. Can we invite someone to come into the meeting next September and talk about that?
I think it'd be great to have like the head of facilities, but I think we also need to have a commission member take this on to get the information now and get moving quickly on it for grants. I don't know if Jeff or Brianna or anybody can do that.
Or if Hillary, if there might be somebody in the city that can work with somebody on the commission and be a team for this. I think it would be really great for the city to, there's a lot of times when we talk about how the city doesn't really have a lot of say or a lot of things that they can do within the school systems. But I think this would be a great opportunity where the city could actually make a big difference for our cluster schools.
Yeah, I'm happy to do the city side of it. I mean, like I said, I'll reach out to the county executive's office about funding, and I can talk to our staff about grant opportunities.
And then I can probably maybe talk to someone in facilities to come. Can I invite someone to the meeting next September?
And I'm wondering if we should be reaching out to the school system to find out if they have something in the works already. There might be something already planned that we're unaware of. Has anyone asked?
I have asked, and the last I was told was they do not. That if a PTA would like to, or PTA or community would like to purchase a purifier for the classroom, they can, but the school system currently has no plans to provide air purification units, individual air purification units for the classroom.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe if Odessa and Hillary, if you guys can take that on, and then maybe when Edith comes back, because I know classroom safety was part of the things that she was concerned about. So maybe we can see if that's something that she might be interested in assisting with as well. Or if somebody knows somebody within the community who might be willing to do that. I can ask some of the parents that I know that looked into it for us for Eastport Elementary and see, maybe we can put something on the Facebook page asking if there's somebody that's interested in this, and see, if we can get somebody to volunteer, because it doesn't have to be obviously just us. It can be.
Okay, well, I'll try to work and try to get some information, but I'm not really that familiar with purifiers and things like that. But maybe I can talk to someone that works in facilities, and hopefully, I mean, is there anything wrong with them coming maybe to the meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll be in touch with you, Odessa.
Okay, thank you.
Hillary, if you can copy me on any updates from the city.
I sure will.
And I will also say, just to add this in there, I'll send this out to Hillary and Odessa, but, and copy you on in India. I know that one of the things that one of our parents found, and somebody else who's listening just sent it to me as well, is there is a DIY option that has been promoted by some of the leading schools of health. So if we can't get the actual purifiers, maybe it's at least something that we can look into, but I'll send that to you just to include in the conversation.
Yeah, I've met, there's a local gentleman that is working on that, and it's really neat. His success in purifying the air is really high, and he does it with 2 box fans and a filter that you can get at Home Depot. They're like $50 a piece.
Yeah, at this point, that's what we're looking at putting in the cafeteria at Eastport right now.
Yeah, I mean, they're really effective. It was amazing. He brought in a meter and showed us the effectiveness. The downside is the noise level, but for cafeterias, that's no big deal.
Mhm.
For classrooms, I think it's an issue.
Well, and it's also, that's a good thing in large areas, cafeterias, media centers, big areas where really realistically you would have to get 2 or 3 individual purifiers to meet the CADR requirements for those rooms. So, that might be, part of the whole solution, right?
The problem I've heard, and I follow one of
All
the
right.
leading air quality people on Twitter, one of the leading scientists, and the problem with those DIY ones that he actually promoted the design for was that the need to change those filters regularly makes it less cost effective. Like, so its initial cost was low because you're using standard filters from the store, but having to change out those filters made it much more costly than originally assumed.
All right, so we will continue this conversation. Thank you, Janet, for that. We'll get into that as well and continue this conversation.
But maybe we could enlist all the Eagle Scout, troops, or all the Boy Scout troops, all the Girl Scout troops, to take on these projects and take ownership of them, and do the maintenance that goes along with replacing them.
The city of Annapolis's largest youth service opportunity in a decade.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody, for all your good ideas.
Okay, any other new business?
I have new business that's old business that's never finished business. I went online about a month ago, and I noticed that the flawed and incomplete data for Annapolis High School's grade schools rating has not changed or budged one iota that I've noticed. Jess, Laura, and I, and many other people have to respond endlessly to new people moving into the system or people who are only familiar with private schools about why Annapolis High is rated a 3 out of 10 and, oh, it must be such a horrible school. Period. So somebody needs to follow up on that and make sure it's actually completed, because it's the hot potato that no one has carried over the finish line.
Even today, I was responding to a post where someone was discouraging people to sign up for the E-Academy at Monarch because the Monarch test ratings were bad. The Monarch physical school ratings were bad. So therefore they assumed, well, first of all, they assumed that meant something about the school. And second of all, they assumed that meant something about the virtual academy. So you have people who are actively looking for a virtual option for their children and are being told because of the rating system. And it's really tiring. I would like to do something other with my time than completely continue to argue against false information regarding our schools.
Right. And so, we've squawked. Somebody in higher levels, the city needs to take this on. The delegates have offered to help, but somebody needs to be the point people to finalize this fix, because it's not being fixed, and it's just being dropped among all the parties. So, Hillary, if you can get the city council and the mayor to care about it.
Or if you have an intern that would be willing to do, like, one of the things that needs to be done is just to have somebody sit down with each of the things, claim the school, work with the principal to claim the school, or work with the principals to make sure that the information's correct. It's not only an education thing. This is something that negatively affects our city as a whole. It affects our property rates, property tax rates. It affects our home values. It affects a lot of, different parts of daily life for people who have no children in the school, have no plan to ever have children in the school. But it affects, for a city that relies on property tax for the majority of its income, this is, getting this solved is really, really important.
Yes, thanks.
Difficult times, guys. These are some difficult times. Our counseling office at Annapolis High School is taking a big hit too. We're losing at least 2 of our counselors and the social worker and the
Who have they
PPD.
lost, Odessa? Who have they lost?
Miss Jones, she left. I think she's retiring. Miss Jones,
Okay.
and she's been there for
Okay.
quite a while. And Miss
else?
Isadora,
Okay.
Miss Handmaker.
Oh, Ms. Hamaker is gone?
Right. She's retired. Miss Wheeler, Peggy Wheeler, the PPW. And on top of
Okay.
there's a lot of new people's going to be there at the high school. So Mr. Delanis has a lot on his plate right now.
Yes, he does. But the more we can reach out and support those new members of the high school community that are supporting students' mental health, students' grades, and things, that we can connect them with the resources they need to know, that's important.
That's true.
Yeah. Thank you for letting us know that.
Yeah. On top of the air conditioning blowing up. Oh my gosh. Can you believe it?
And we were supposed to have not only all the teachers can't go in, but we were supposed to have 700 kids take their SATs, which many of them haven't taken SATs because they weren't available in the previous year, and that's one way to get college scholarships and stuff. So it's just a horrible situation all around.
Yep. Has anyone heard any more about any expected timeline for repairs or for being back in the classroom, or what that's?
Well, I know it's closed tomorrow. You mean as far as the air conditioner?
Yeah.
I know it's closed tomorrow, but more than likely it'll probably be closed again on Friday because they have to get parts. And that's a slow moving process within itself.
Yeah.
Especially
India,
right now.
Can you reach out to Bob Mosier and find out on behalf of our cluster and our parents what the current timeline is?
Sure.
And what will happen, right? If the school can't open and we're not planning for a virtual option, then what will happen? I have a freshman who just really wants to go to high school. But in general, all of our kids, what will happen, right? Will there be a virtual option if they can't open? Or will they be going in without an HVAC system, which is definitely not recommended during COVID or during hot September days in general? But specifically during COVID, what is the alternative? I mean, I know that's 2 weeks away, so hopefully, but I also know the construction pipeline and the supply pipeline is pretty bad right now.
How can
We don't really
teachers
know
get
how-
their classrooms ready in time?
We don't really know how bad the situation there is. Like, it's one thing that we heard there was an electrical fire, but it's one thing if there is a broken part, but like if the whole unit went up, that means they've got to remove the whole unit and install a whole unit, which means they've got to get a whole unit from somewhere, which is a significant amount of work. And usually units sized for, industrial use are, you don't just go down to True Value to pick one up. So.
I have, if it's new business, but I want to congratulate Janet on dropping off her second Grown and Flown today. Congratulations, Janet.
Thank you, Jeff. Driving through Ohio on my way back from Michigan, and happy to help any other families that you know of through the college application process, because I'm a very good bureaucrat and I'm happy to help any others crank through that with their students. if you, this is one thing I would like to say. If you know of anyone who's a rising senior this year, please encourage them to contact their teachers like tomorrow to ask for teacher recommendations, because the year is going to go to hell quickly. And we want each student who needs it to have teacher recommendations in Naviance before things fall apart. So reach out, Odessa, if you can let people know. Tell them to email their teachers right now asking for those recommendations, because whether you're going to culinary school, whether you're going to trade apprenticeship, everybody needs recommendations. Every single internship requires recommendations, and every one of our kids needs to be getting those now, because they might not be able to get them easily later on.
Okay, thank you.
Hillary, is that something that we could put out through the community services, to our various, I know the various organizations that you work with that work with students to, just encourage that information?
Yeah, we don't specifically have a list like that, but we could send it out to the nonprofits that are grantees, the ones that work with, that get city grants. We have a list of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that we can do, even having like Pip Moyer sense, ARPD, which, connects with a lot of students, anything that we can do to get that information out as much as possible, I think is really helpful.
Sure.
Anything else before we close the meeting? Okay, thanks everyone. Meeting